Good evening. I see a lot of familiar faces in the new room, but for those of you who don't know me, my name is Alex, and I'm going to be talking about the Maya calendar today. Now, I know on the online thing, it says Mayan calendar, and that's technically a typo. Mayan is the language, Maya is the adjective. And for anybody who's curious, everything up here can be translated. I learned how to read some hieroglyphics to, because I got really into this after reading a book. It's this one over here, Stairway to the Stars, which is naturally not going to show up. Naturally not going to show up, but it's in my works cited, so at the end you can find it. It was originally going to be a quick book report, but what ended up happening was it was way too complicated just for this one section. So this ended up being a talk, and there's probably going to be something that I write for the newsletter that's going to be out soon. I'm still finishing writing it. So just a brief overview. Who were the Maya? They lived in Central America between the Yucatan up here and down El Salvador in this region. All of this in the dark green. They were something like the Greek city-states of Alexander the Great, of a bunch of varying kingdoms who all kind of were relatively unified, but were not quite unified. And they spoke Mayan, which is both the language family and the language that they spoke. And every single branch of Mayan is called Mayan in their independent Mayan languages. It's very confusing. So the classical Maya, which is what we're going to be talking about for the most part here, were roughly from 250 AD until 900 AD, which was kind of the peak of Maya civilization when this was truly a sort of empire, sort of kingdom thing. And then after 900, it dwindled down to a lot more independent city-states that kind of warred between them. But that's enough of the history. Why the astronomy? Well, all right, anytime you want to change, next slide. Okay. The Maya were expert visual astronomers. They tracked all of the visible planets and they had god names for each of the planets and each of the apparent orbits that the planets had. Venus has 5 of them. Mars has at least 24. Mercury is a little bit more confusing, and they also had the moon and the sun, of course. Uxmal, which is not the most impressive site, but it's the one that I have the archaeological picture for, is one of the sites that the governor's house down here is actually aligned with a pyramid off in another city, so that every time Venus reset its orbit, it was at the exact same point where you stand at the governor's house to give any sort of speech. This is the intensity of which they built their structures to align with astronomy. And the more famous example, the one behind me, the Great Pyramid of Chichen Itza, which is clearly directly behind me, this feathered serpent appeared only on the the equinoxes. So twice a year, the shadow the pyramid casts creates this feathered serpent appearance. And this is dedicated to the Nahuatl word Quetzalcoatl, who the Maya called Ku'ulkan. So they were expert astronomers and built their important buildings dedicated to the stars around this. So let's get into really the Maya calendar, but in order to do that, we kind of have to think like a Maya would. So we have to go with the easy calendar first, which will go with the Hab, or the annual calendar, which are 18 months, which are Winnick, of 20 days, which is in, and this makes 360 days, and then there's 1 month of 5 days. So this calendar was mostly for the civil affairs and to kind of track the sun and make sure that seasons were sort of together. This one is also the one that they used for the long count, which is why we know so much about the dates for Maya history, because they were meticulous in their date keeping. This is tied extremely into their religion, and they had the calendar go back as far as approximately August 14th, 3114 BC, which is a very long time for a calendar. And for those who are curious, there are 2 different segments of the calendar, which we'll cover why these are important later. One is a 20-year segment called a Katun, and the other is a 400-year segment called a Baktun, which are basically various counting mechanisms so that the calendar can work. So this is the obvious calendar. Now let's get into the one that's really unique to the Maya. This is the Tzab, the Tzolk'in. So this is 20 days for a month. In 13 weeks, we're going to call them weeks, but we're going to see what they actually look like. And these will total about 260 days. These are also what is used to predict eclipses because they occur on the same day, and we'll see those later. And this Tzolk'in calendar ensures that religious holidays fall on the same civil day. And so that every one of the gods for Mayan astronomy are in their proper spot for the entire event. Now, let's get into the details of it. So, these are the 20-day names. Don't worry about what they are just yet. We're just going to talk through it first. So the rotation of the Tzolk'in dates. So the first day, which we'll call 1 Imish Pop. Pop is the month, 1 is the day, and Imish is the, Pop is the month, and Imish is the day. Becomes 2 Ik Pop. And this is going to go until you reach 13. Then the cycle restarts, but you have not hit 20 yet. So you count up until you reach what is going to be 20 days total. And then you restart in the next month from the next date. Now, this probably didn't make much sense to you. So let's go back to a physical example. So you have 1 Imish in the month of Pop. So you go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 Ben. Okay, so 13 is over. So now we're going to go 1 Ish. It is still the month of Pop. So now we're going to continue from Ish. Where did my mouse go? So 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, aha. So now we have gone 20 days. So now we're going to go to the next month, which is Wo. And we are at 8 Imish Wo. Now we're going to continue 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Okay, we're in Kimi. So now it's going to be 1 Manik, but we're still in the month of Wo. So 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Ah, interesting. We have now left this cycle, but we still have 1 more day left in the month. So it's 1 Aha the next month. We still have 1 more day. So it's 1 Aha Wo. And the next month starts at 2 Imish. You'll notice in this calendar, every single day for the rest of this year is going to start with the day Imish. This is an intentional thing because it ensures that the calendar always starts on one of the 5 lucky days. Now, I did say that the last month is 5 days. So if you're going to do the math, this one, this one, this one, this one, and this one are all the days that the month can start on. No other day is possible for the start of the month. So if you missed one, you know that you made a mistake somewhere in your math. So that is the basic for how the Mayan calendar works. Does everybody understand that? If not, I can go through it, and I really hope that you saw my mouse because that could be a little bit of a difficult nature if you could not see it. All right, so let's continue then for the note on the eclipses. So the following picture is actually taken from the Dresden Codex of 405 lunar cycles. And we know from modern times that an eclipse occurs every 5 to 6 lunar cycles, which is about 148 to 177 days. So the only thing you got to know for the next slide is that it is a base 20 system. So a dot means 1 and a bar means 5. So the first bottom part can reach a maximum of 20. This is why I said there's going to be a 20-year cycle is one of the importance for the long count. And this one, a dot is going to represent a 20. So this is a 1 and this is a 20. So the bottom here is 15 plus 2. So that's 17. And you have 100, 5 times 20, plus 3 times 20. So 160 plus 17. So that's 177. And the glyph on the left is the lunar eclipse glyph. And this is going to continue on the bottom for the next 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then the 6th is going to equal 8. So 3 plus 5 plus 140. So 148. And here you have the sun glyph. So you can see that they have actually tracked an eclipse over the course of about 45 years. And these dates up here represent the days that in the Mayan calendar, it will actually occur. This is the Dresden Codex being both the actual astronomy book for the Maya for the lunar, the solar, the Venus, and some argue the Martian patterns. And this is basically the extent of how we know so much about Maya history and why we know that they were so meticulous at documenting what they saw in the night sky. Now, I know everybody has probably got the exact same question I do. That December 21st, 2012 date, what was so special about that? Well, that was the, from every movie that was made, the end of the world, disaster striking. This was actually a time of celebration, because this was the end of the long count calendar. It was the end because it was the 13th Baktun, which is the 13th 400-year cycle since August 14, 3114 BC. So the reason that this was important in Maya history is that this represents the same amount of time that occurred in human history that occurred in the prehistory as documented in the Popol Vuh. And that was the reason why it was a celebration, because it was the start and birth of a new era. And it wasn't the what if the aliens did something and the polarity of the Earth reversed. It had nothing to do with that. So with that, hopefully that makes sense to everybody, but I'm going to conclude my presentation there. This is the name of the book that I was talking about, Stairway to the Stars by Avini. If anybody has any questions, I'll be glad to work them through the Maya calendar again. I know that's probably lost a few people.
We have a question from John.
Yeah, just when was this thing decoded?
Okay, so this is a bit of a bit of an entire history in and of itself. The first thing that was decoded was the dates, which was approximately 1900, and that was when people started to realize that the Maya were tracking something. It wasn't until about 1990 with a Soviet scientist who managed to finally, after the fall of the Soviet Union, get to the US, that he was able to truly be able to translate the Maya glyph, which was able to confirm the that it was an eclipse from some of the documentation above. A removed document.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
Alex, may I ask you a question?
Yes.
Did they track the zodiac at all? Were they doing something along the lines of Western astronomy?
Yes. So this is what I had to cut, because you'll notice that I definitely added some more detail in the beginning that I did not cover. The most well-tracked one is Venus, where Venus has an entire cult-like status following to it, where they have 5 different gods for each of the 5 orbits that Venus does, and different representations based on when it was a morning star or an evening star. As for the zodiac, it varies. There's a couple of constellations that the Maya did consider worthy of praise, but this is a bit more up for debate because it's not as well translated. 2 of the constellations I am aware of off the top of my head are the Pleiades, which was the rabbits that were killed in the Popol Vuh after tricking the 2 brothers, who the story is mostly about. They got turned into the Pleiades after burying the seeds that they had stolen. The other one is the crab that the 2 brothers killed, which turned into the constellation Cancer. Yes.
Very interesting. Thank you.
Of all the constellations, Cancer is also a crab to the Maya.
Interesting. Thank you.
Alex, there's a question from Luis Gantris. Was the Dresden Codex a removed document? I'm not sure what she means by removed document. And also, kill your screen share.
Oh, yes. One moment. Stop share.
So the question is, where did the Dresden Codex come from? When was it?
The Dresden Codex, for all that we are aware of at the moment, was a codex that was rescued by a Jesuit priest from the Yucatan Peninsula. It is an unknown publication date, although there's some indication it might be 1300, but it's unknown what the exact date was. And it was saved from the conquistador book burning in the area. And it was brought back to Dresden to show that the Maya had some cultural value that the Jesuits wanted to preserve. What they ended up doing with it was showing it off as the conquest of the native world and why European civilization was better. I don't agree with that, but it is the story of how that was preserved. And thankfully, that one priest managed to pick up one of the 6 remaining codices that are left in the entire world. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Our next speaker is our youngest member of WAA, Eli, and he is a cartoonist. And here, you want to maybe stand, can you see him? And here's the mouse, I'll help you see.
Okay. The Westchester Astronomers unproudly presents the unfortunate return of my astronomically bad cartoons.
All right.
Okay, praise
No,
for the
it's not,
unfortunate.
it's not shared.
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, I thought it was you.
Oh, Zoom.
You're still on your,
Oh,
you're still
sorry.
on the other. You have to kill that. Kill
Okay,
the, kill
let's
the,
go back one. Let's do the first slide
kill the
again.
PowerPoint.
Okay.
Okay. The unfortunate return of my astronomically
Wait,
bad.
let me go here, too.
Sorry. But let's do new shares.
Did you see it? I can see it.
No, that.
Yes, okay. Okay.
Praise for the unfortunate return of my astronomically bad cartoons. Very unfortunate indeed, the audience. I am speechless. It was so terrible. The world unanimously. One question that will question humanity for centuries to come is why all presentations tonight are so much better than this one. If a plumber wrote a book about astrophysics, it would be like this. Okay, well, of course, you don't want to see the first My Astronomically Bad cartoons, but if you really want to see it, it's in the June newsletter. And that was my member profile, and this was a thing for that I wrote in August. I like to draw cartoons that feature astronomy and other topics such as spying on people in restaurants, memoirs about eggs, and eating oats at 4 o'clock in the morning. On the next slide is my first astronomy-related cartoon that appeared in the March 2022 Skywatch along with my member profile, plus my favorite cartoon about astronomy to date by my favorite cartoonist, Ross Chast. Shark Tank in Italy, 1609. And for that, Galileo has the invention telescope and my favorite cartoon about astronomy today by my favorite cartoonist, Ross Chast. It's called The Cheery Storm. The other day, I watched a video about how the universe is going to end. The universe is about 14 billion years old. It's still in its infancy. In 8 billion years, the sun will expand into a massive hell monster, and what remains of Earth will be destroyed. In another billion years, the sun will collapse and go from an exploded red giant to a pathetic white dwarf. But who cares? Because in 100 trillion years, all stars throughout the universe will begin to die off. Then we enter the degenerate era, where everything must go, and I do mean go. In a trillion years, black holes will start sucking everything up, including each other. Protons themselves decay. In a trillion years, all matter disappears. We begin the black hole era, which lasts until the black holes themselves begin to die, which they do. Dark energy inflates the universe. In a trillion years, the last black hole evaporates. Time will become meaningless. Nothing can change. Nothing will ever change. The end. On the other hand, maybe they're wrong. Here's some of my not astronomy related cartoons. Things I hate that sound cool. Influenza. Ku Klux Klan. B. On with the hog. These sometimes grow weirdly.
They do.
You don't want to hear the end. Egg Memoirs, The Yolk of Truth, How a Double Yolk Egg Changed My Life by Greg the Egg. Scrambled, Why Eggs Make Me So Confused by Anonymous Egg. Chicken to Mouth, I Eat Them Raw by Johann Sebastian Bach. Live at the Restaurant, Joe's Living Room. Alexa, play Live at the Restaurant. And here's Piescape Restaurants. And is obviously being recorded here. Okay, astronomy related cartoons by various cartoonists. This is from the New Yorker. Okay, we're quietly confident it smells of cinnamon. We've got 5 planets in our galaxy that may have life and 2 that have Wi-Fi. This is $1. Anything? Tomorrow's astronomy, Detritus Major, the little planet that grew rich by offering itself as a galaxy-wide garbage dump. Earth Day, what have I, chopped liver? Something goes around something, but that's as far as I've got. Good news, I see your keys next to the flag. Poor Zachary, a meteorite squashed his sing-song. Webb telescope's first images allow us to see some extremely distant and frankly better galaxies. These are astronomy related cartoons that Kennedy Space Center, Launchpad 39A, rocket launch moon. Best seats in the house. I know, right? Hey, do you know what all these danger signs are about? Watching on live tweet. My own telescope repair center. That's a big crack. Thankfully, we have Scotch tape. Free lunch chatting, free lunch breakfast, T-minus 5 hours, T-minus 20 minutes. Hey, you remember how we were going to the moon today? Yeah, is that still happening? You may ask a question in the next nanosecond. The unfortunate return of my astronomically bad cartoons. You're 100% guaranteed to not like. That guy's still doing that. The third set of astronomically bad cartoons.
Any questions? Excellent job.
How are you gonna follow that?
You gotta kill the.
Well, that was my opening line, thanks. Yeah, I get to go after a guy here who does more by 4 a.m. than I've accomplished in 66 years, so, you know. So, you know, we could just skip all this. No, we're not. I can spend too much time with it. I mean, it was a whole hour. I mean, how are we gonna get to the moon, folks? Hi, folks. I'll just talk over here while they're trying to find my slides. Ah, there we go.
No, I gotta share it first.
but they're gonna share first. It's always good to share. Imagine anything we could say, don't want to share. I mean, now we're doing that too. So it's been a strange world these last 2.5 years. But anyway, how do we get to the moon again? Well, we take some pieces of shuttle technology. Okay, we got 4 engines in the main engine pod there that were all flown on shuttle missions. We've got 2 solid rocket boosters, 1 on each side. Okay, but they're not the same as the shuttle because there's actually 5 segments, not 4. And the external tank in the middle looks a whole lot like the external tank on the shuttle, right? Let's see if we can go to that. There we go. The external tank in the middle looks a whole lot like the one on the shuttle there, except it's not. The shuttle, and folks at home have to follow along this way, it was on the side of the external tank. The Orion craft is on top. So they had to rebuild the external tank with ribs that supported a vertical load rather than a horizontal load. So it's a lot of shuttle derived technology, but a lot of it is really different. They had to retool all the plants for this. So we'll see how this all works. As you know, they tried to get off the ground a couple of weeks ago, and they are going to, matter of fact, this rocket as it is now has what they call an interim cryogenic propulsion stage as its top stage below the Orion spacecraft and service module. That, by the way, gets Orion to the moon, but it does not get a lunar lander to the moon. So they're going to need an advanced stage or borrow something from SpaceX. And we'll see how that goes. But anyway, they've got it all set up. Artemis 1, uncrewed. Artemis 2, crew loops around the moon and comes back on a free return trajectory, so nothing can go wrong. Artemis 4 lands on the moon, the first person of color and the first woman to step on the moon. That's the plan. How long that will take? They pretty much launch 1 a year. So we'll see how this goes. They're going to try to reconnect the liquid hydrogen inputs that gave them so much trouble. And they're going to put those back together on the 21st of September and see if that works. They have high confidence it will. Then they go for a launch date of September 27th, weather and everything else permitting, with a backup date maybe of October 2nd. What's the problem with this backup date? Well, the batteries on the self-destruct system in the spacecraft are not certified at that point anymore. They actually probably are. They have a factor of 2, yeah, they have safety factors and everything, but the range safety people say you're outside the bounds. And since we do not want this becoming the next live exhibit at Disney World, on let's say October 2nd, we want to make sure those batteries work. We hate to push the button and say, gee, nothing happened. So we hope they don't have to do that, of course. It's quite an impressive thing. This is the craft with the largest amount of thrust that's ever been launched from Earth if it gets to orbit. The Soviets tried it with the N1, but they never got out of the atmosphere, so they don't count. And as you'll notice down there, I have my boarding pass there. I get 1.3 million miles if they make it to the moon. So I'm really looking forward to it. We're trying to find a program to accept those miles, but we will see about that. So we're all looking forward to that. And you know, hey, it's a tough time for that. Our next Starway to Heaven, tomorrow. You may wonder what the weather's going to be tomorrow night. So am I. That's a lot of haziness out there, a lot of high clouds. There's a damp layer about 800 millibars, about 1,500 meters. It probably will be a day we'll go for it, but it's right now, even the clear sky chart is saying that the transparency is very low, but clear, they say. So it's likely that we will go for it. We'll have the Milky Way, if we can see it through the haze, up above us, which will be really nice once it gets dark out there. Dark comes earlier. Mercury and Venus are too close to the sun. Thank you very much. Let's not try for that. Saturn rises at 5. Saturn will be up when we get out there. Jupiter will rise shortly after sunset. Mars rises much later. But they're all really great to look at now because Jupiter just passed opposition. Saturn's a couple of months past it, and Mars is on its way to December, which we'll hear about in Joe Rayo. Which I'm looking forward to that one. I was wondering about that one myself, and I almost talked about it, so I'm glad he's doing. We'll have a crescent moon that will rise around 11:15 for you dark sky people. You'll have to wrap it up before then. Backup date is the following weekend. And if you haven't got enough of star parties, October 1st, we've got our very special. Oh, I didn't move to that slide. The moon's sideways, but who cares? It fits better on the slide, folks. I know the labels are this way, but you can't read them anyway. Can you read those at home? Okay, just check. That's nice that they're all on mute, really. Don't have to worry about all that criticism that's now flying through the ether. I mean, it's. Thanks for watching. Anyway, so International Observe the Moon Night happens to be October 1st. I don't think I knew that when we set up this date. Paul and I kind of worked this out, a few other people. 39% lit, sun will be risen over the Sea of Tranquility and heading toward the Apennine Mountains, not quite reaching the Apollo 15 site. This moon phase is for 8 p.m. Moon set is at 10:11, so it would be a short night, except of course you don't have to wait till sunset to observe the moon. We were doing it the other day at our food pantry yesterday, just showing people the moon. That's now in the morning sky for the next couple of days, pretty high up if you want to get a look at it. It's pretty worth it right now. Any questions?
I have one.
Yes, please.
I was thinking about Florida. It is somebody who forecasts weather. Do you think they're gonna change some of these launch sites to places where it doesn't rain every single day, cloudy and overcast? Do you see that in the future?
I think that I would think that like the Europeans would have, for example. I mean, they had their site down closer to the equator, so they get more of a boost from the Earth's spin. I just don't know what you do. I mean, you put it in the middle of the Sahara Desert, but then you got to get all the stuff there.
Of
course,
you have to build another one of those 70-story vehicle assembly buildings.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
Doing that.
I was just curious if it's
Yeah.
something that they
I-
bring in the future and talk about.
It's a good question, and I have to say, I hadn't even given it any thought because, I mean, but Jules Verne picked Tampa. So
Yeah.
we figured that if it was good enough for him, Kennedy Space Center, you know, close enough. I mean, that was pretty amazing how much of it he ultimately got, how much of it ultimately we fulfilled of what he predicted.
Yeah.
That's part of it. I mean, no closer to the equator maybe, but I don't really know if you got to have transportation. You got to be on the water. And there's where your moisture comes from. There's where your bad weather comes from. Florida particularly bad. I mean, not just because of the hurricane things, but because of thunderstorms. Yeah. So if your launch windows are often in the afternoon, you really have picked a bad site. Anyway, I'll leave it at that unless there's another question. Yeah, why don't you go to the next people? And that way, yes, go ahead.
New rocket has a lot more power than the old one. Why did they need so much power? They got to the moon and back on less power?
That's right, they did, in fact. That's the funny thing about it. It has more power than the previous Saturn V they used, but that's because you've got those honking super solid rocket boosters on the outside. That makes all the difference. If you were still trying to look at liquid propellant, you wouldn't be doing it. The problem is also though, is we don't have enough propulsion in the upper stage. We can get that all up, but we can't get it to the moon yet. So they're in the process of developing an upper stage for it. So it's kind of, they actually cut back the size of the Orion capsule because they knew they couldn't get it out of the Earth's orbit to the moon. This one's going to go in what they call a distant retrograde orbit around the moon. It's like a 33,000 mile orbit that kind of is out where all the forces balance. It's not at a site like that. So they're going to use that to give this Orion spacecraft a long time out by the moon to make sure that this was originally Barack Obama's idea, was to send Orion to an asteroid, which probably would have been easier than what we're trying to do now as far as mass. And before that, of course, George W. Bush had the Constellation program, which wanted us to go back to the moon, but they didn't give it enough money. It was doomed to die. And I'm not trying to be political here. I'm just trying to just show so after all that, we've sludged together this wonderful rocket and we'll see what happens. But we had a lot of failures in the early days of the other ones too. So, and a lot of times we didn't get off the ground first up with that. So we'll see what happens.
Rick, do you have your slide ready?
Yes, I do.
You can share the screen now.
Okay, sharing.
Rick Bria, and he's going to be talking about Yerkes Observatory. Yeah.
I assume you can see it.
Yeah, see if you can start the slideshow.
Slideshow, yeah.
Okay, here we go. All right, as you probably figured out, I got a wonderful tour of the Yerkes Observatory and had a great time. Fantastic. I highly recommend it. So if you have any interest at all in old observatories or anything old, I highly recommend you take a trip. And I guess Eva went and recently and saw it, and I assume that she had a great time too. We had fantastic weather. Everything was fine. The observatory was spectacular. Here you see it with the dome open. We happened to open the dome when we were in it. We had a private tour with the executive director. His name is Dennis Coy. Treated us fantastically. And here's another day we walk around the grounds. The grounds are beautiful. I think it's like 50 something acres of essentially like a big park. And as you can see from Google Earth on the bottom there, you could see the main building is orientated east-west, and the two smaller observatories are orientated north-south. You come in this, I figured we come down here as a driveway, but turns out you don't up here with, which I thought would be the front. You drive around to this parking lot and you go in the back, which is here. So they have all nice new sidewalk. You know, they're gearing up for this is the first time it's been open, I think, in like several years. And so they're gearing up to have more and more visitors and open it up to the public, almost like as a museum and what have you, and have star parties in there, and they have weddings and what have you. And here is the once in a while you'll see the finger nebula come out. But the thing is, this, believe it or not, this isn't just massive. The picture doesn't do it any justice. This is a ladder where you can climb up on top, I guess, to do some sort of inspection of the dome. I mean, it's just so ridiculously massive. I would have loved to walk around this railing here, but we weren't given the opportunity. Anyway, the architecture is just spectacular. You wonder back then what they were thinking about heat dissipation and all that stuff. All the masonry has to be absorbing heat, but evidently it worked out because it has a big history of all sorts of achievements. The small domes have a 41. It's not really a 41, but they call it a 41 to not have confusion with the 40. And that's a 20, and the other one has a 24-inch reflector. We weren't allowed to go in because they were working on them. We could actually hear working going on when we were there. Sections were fenced off where, you know, they were worried about where people get hurt and all that stuff. There's a lot of, again, the architecture, they have like flying lions and owls, winged things. Just, you know, you think you're in like a cathedral or a castle or something. It's kind of weird that it's an observatory. I remember seeing pictures as a kid. In fact, I have a book, what's it called? The Sun and the Worlds Around It, and had a cartoon picture of Yerkes, and I never knew it until recently. So it's called the Birthplace of Modern Astrophysics. Down here, there's this huge, monstrous machine shop where they would make things. You know, they needed all sorts of gadgets, and they would make it. So that it's an integration of observatory, physics and chemistry laboratories, and a library with all kinds of documents that you know, that people could look up with whatever the heck they were studying. The atmosphere of Titan was discovered there. They did a lot of stellar parallax. Dark nebulae were discovered, double stars, comets, asteroids. They did a lot of spectra. They did a lot of solar work, and much to my surprise, they pioneered adaptive optics there. And you can actually, I'm sure probably Eva saw that too. They take you down where they grabbed a lot of equipment that was Star Wars, strategic defense initiative stuff, and they turned it into adaptive optics. Here's the North Dome. I wasn't really allowed to go near it because it was all fenced off. There were a lot of work going on there. But again, has the same sort of, and this I would assume would be the front entrance, but you don't go in this way, you go on the other side. Here's Marianne, my wife Marianne. At the entrance you actually go into with all these elaborate carved terracotta pillars and what have you. I was a little disappointed that this, it's supposed to be a globe up here, but they were refurbishing it. So it's obviously not in the picture. And then you have these, again, these, you might have seen this, it's kind of, if you ever Google Yerkes Observatory, you can see these caricatures carved in, and the zodiac signs and stars and crescent moons and that sort of thing. And many representations of Yerkes himself, who I'll just say that he wasn't well thought of. And so here he's depicted with devil horns and all sorts of strange facial expressions throughout the observatory. There's the crescents, well, moon phases, I should say, and stars and what have you carved in. And here's a caricature of John D. Rockefeller with a bee that was stinging his nose, is now chiseled off because they didn't want to insult him in case he would give them some money. And then you have more owls and horsemen and all that stuff. And then as you're entering, you get the evil eye from Yerkes himself. Inside, very well, nicely done, this entryway. There's Marianne showing the standing at the south entrance. The right entrance is to the right. The main entrance to the right. And dead ahead, that stairway is up, brings you up to the 40-inch. And the interesting thing is, at least on our tour, we toured these offices that were used by all the greats, many of the greats in astronomy. And so you're sitting where they were sitting, the fantastic library there of all ancient books and what have you. And then the story that Carl Sagan either banged the floor into the telescope or the telescope into the floor. However you want to. It's the only possible way he could hit something, because you can't hit the front end of the telescope where the lens is. You can't really bang it into anything. It doesn't reach anything. But the bottom, the floor goes up and down, as you'll see later. And so he banged it into the floor. So that's kind of a funny story. But the tile work on the floor is all fantastic. I did leave out a name here. You're probably gonna could figure out who that name is. No, it's not Einstein. It's the stars from Chain Reaction. When we, I guess Larry turned us on to that. When we got home, we saw the movie, and we were cracking up, seeing all the sign, all the things we've seen, the doors, the stairs, and they're running down the hall, being chased by evil people and what have you. It's kind of fun to see the movie after we were there. Anyway, fantastically restored. They have weddings there, business meetings, that sort of thing. And again, here's another Yerkes. And here's a 40-inch device. Marianne's displaying this 40-inch device that they use for like a magnitude calibration. And behind her and up and above her head is the floor counterweight system that's connected via cables and pulleys, so that you can raise and lower the floor 23 feet. The floor is 75 feet in diameter. It's just a huge thing. So Marianne is standing there with the 40-inch circle. For scale factors, she's 60 inches tall if she wore heels. And so that's it for that slide. But here's a look at the 40-inch scope with the floor all the way down, and we're really far away from it. It's really way up there. The dome is massive. It's unbelievable how big the dome is. It's got 1960s equipment attached to it. Like they kind of did an upgrade there. Now it has electric motors. It used to have a nice clockwork drive, which I would have loved to have seen, but they don't have that anymore. Like a big grandfather clock kind of a mechanism. Of course, the Alvin Clark lens is the biggest he's ever done. It's 500 pounds. The lens focal length is an f/19. F/19. I guess they didn't believe in ED glass or anything like that back then. The focal length is 63 feet. The tube weighs 6 tons, and the telescope mount assembly is 82 tons. Just a massive, massive thing. Just a wonder to behold. Here's when we were able to raise the floor. We were allowed to raise the floor and get a better look at it. And then here's the reverse angle. And thanks Eva for this. This is Eva's picture, a really close-up view of the working end of the scope. Of course, it's been modernized, and here's a picture of how it looked back then. I would have loved to see this. All these like nautical kind of wheels connected by chains to turn rods that go all the way up to the mount, so you can make adjustments. Just, I mean, just a spectacular thing. You know, they didn't know. You know, they didn't have the equipment, of course, we have now. So everything had to be mechanical. It must have been something to behold. There's like a 1960s kind of control panel where you raise and lower the floor and you know, and do some basic you know, adjustments and what have you now. And then there's this massive mount that kind of reminded me of pictures of the Titanic, like when you see pictures of the engine of the Titanic or the boilers of Titanic. They're just so ridiculously thick. You know, they didn't have computer-aided design back then. They just had to make things so strong, ridiculously strong. Stanford Observatory was sort of like that, where they just made things mount ridiculously strong that, you know, they didn't know how strong to make it. They didn't want to take any chances. And so the telescope mount is by Warner and Swayze, and from Cleveland, Ohio. Just a massive thing. And of course, this floor goes up and down. This opening in the floor just, you know, clears this as it goes up and down. Look at all these massive wheels where the dome rides on, and there off in the distance is the control panel. And now we're on a pier beneath, you know, this is the pier beneath the floor. We caught up with a regular tour group. And of course, the pier, as anybody would know, if you're building an observatory, the pier has to go like way below the frost level. So this is like 40 feet into the ground. It's a masonry structure. So it was built in 1895. So the technology they did, and they must have been using to make this thing, must have been so primitive, just amazing that they're able to do what they did. Try to do like a panorama to give you an idea how big it is, just this massive. So that's the floor above us that goes up and down. And then the enlarger was too tall. By the way, they use up to 8 by 10 plates, glass plates. And so the enlarger was too tall to fit in the room. So they had to cut this pit down into the ground so that they could actually do some enlarging. And they have over 170,000 glass plates spanning a century. And the envelopes are deteriorating. So they're going to re-envelope everything and then digitize everything. So anybody doing any research and want to know how stars moved and stuff, they did a lot of you know, stellar positioning back then with these plates. And then these couple of plates were on display. And so I noticed that the Mars plate said 1909, September 28th. And so I couldn't resist taking a picture of it with my cell phone. And then I put it into PixInsight and made it into a positive and did, you know, some minor tweaking to it. And then I went to Sky Safari and put the date, you know, in year and date, and the time I did when Mars was roughly at the meridian, and it worked out great. Where you could see this I blurred it down here so it kind of matches. You can see where the Hellas Desert and Syrtis Major and Meridiani all pretty much match what you have here. The moon on that night was not even 2 degrees away from Mars, so getting probably had a lot of moonlight distorting the view. But kind of gives me a weird feeling like this person who took this thing in 1909 never could have even conceived of a thing called a cell phone, where someone over 100 years later would take a picture of his picture or her picture and then process it in a thing called a computer. And so it just gives you the kind of the willies to think how much time has passed. And they've got all sorts of artifacts. And here's George Hale's first telescope. It was, you know, forgotten to death, and they recently found it in a corner of the basement, and they're going to restore it. They got many other astronomical documents. I had a version of Edwin Hubble's dissertation from 1920, flipping through the pages, an 8-page thing titled Photographic Investigations of Faint Nebula. And of course, 4 years later, he discovered the expanding universe. That all the galaxies are flying away from each other. And of course, there's various prototypes of equipment for NASA. They would be assigned to make, whether it was a sensor or they did stuff for Sophia, all sorts of stuff laying around where they constructed stuff for NASA, prototypes of things that NASA was working on. Just a ton of neat stuff down there. So it's in Williams Bay, Wisconsin. Lake Geneva is nearby. We stood at a Geneva Inn, Lake Geneva Inn. Just a beautiful place to visit. Fantastic little town fantastic museum in the town. That was like one of the highlights of our trip. This museum I didn't even think was even there, and stumbled upon it. It was a great day. Of course, you can go on the internet and go check it out yourself. They got all sorts of information there, and you get a ton of information on the internet about Yerkes Observatory. Here we're about 6 miles away. You can still see the little, where my cursor is, you still see a little bump of the 40-inch dome way off in the distance. Fantastic place to visit. I highly recommend anybody, and I'm sure Eva will confirm. Fantastic place to visit. If you have any interest in astronomy or history, I think you'll enjoy it. Thanks very much.
Excellent.
2018, just before it closed, it was built and owned by the University of Chicago, and they didn't want to support it anymore. And they kind of were looking for a buyer, and the possibility was that it was actually torn down. It's not a National Historic Monument.
Yeah, they were gonna put condos all around it. I remember hearing about it in Sky and Tell, and I'm gonna stop sharing. I remember hearing about it in Sky and Tell, and thinking, oh man, that's a shame. And thankfully, this organization took it on. I think they've raised 15 million. They need about 30 million. They're going to make a visitor center and all sorts. They still got a lot of work to do on it. I think Eva would agree. They did a lot of great stuff, but they still got a lot of work to do on it to make it.
At least they have an organization that has now reopened it, because it was closed for about 3 years. And
Yeah, this is the first season. I think it's the first season they've been open. In fact, I think they opened in like March or something like that, maybe even May.
Yeah,
So this is the first season they've been open.
Right, we were told was that what prevented it from being developed was someone found the original deed, which specified that the property reverted to the Yerkes family, but used for anything other than astronomy. Apparently, in the nick of time, they kept it from being.
That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, we were
Yerkes-
told that story. Yeah.
Yerkes himself was a very colorful character. He was chased out of Pennsylvania for some bad financial deal, but he developed the Chicago railway L system.
Yeah, he was a cat.
Positive.
That's being kind, saying his character. Yeah.
He needed some positive press, and so Hale, who was a young man at the time, and just was taken on by the University of Chicago, hit him up for I think 300,000 or 3 million, one of those. But eventually Yerkes left. And actually, I believe that he was partially responsible for the London tube system.
Yeah, we heard that too.
But anyway, let's go to the next.
Okay, next is John Paladini, always has some.
Yeah, all right, so that's announced. And it will show up automatically.
You just double click it so it opens.
All right, so basically, I'm up here mostly just to basically almost like a reporter telling you breaking news. And what the news is that up until very recently, it was impossible to stack images from a SHIG because of the way they're manufactured.
What's a SHIG?
Oh yeah, special heliograph. Okay, so This is something that's just about as new as when in 2001, where in Paris, they came up with the idea of using a webcam on a spectroscope to take the image. And what that does is it shrinks the whole thing down. I'll show you, I'll go through the whole thing. So this is the original spectroheliographic of a dome. It's a monster. And the way it works is that it scans the sun, and then you have a plate, a photographic plate, and you have to do it at the right speed, because if you go too slow, it's going to be underexposed. Too overexposed. If you go
Ed, we can't see anything.
Oh, there. Thank you.
See all your slides, but we don't see the slide you're speaking about. I think you have to share it with us.
See a bunch of pictures?
Yes, we do. We see a whole slide of pictures, but they're all, little icons going across the screen.
See that one?
No, we just see about 12 screens, small little icons that I guess you're trying to show us.
You gotta put it in presentation mode.
No, it's not a PowerPoint.
Just like that, share this, the whole screen.
It's
so advanced,
yeah,
beyond PowerPoint.
Oh, full
There we
screen.
go.
There you go.
There you go.
Okay, so let's start this over again. So this is the spectroheliograph that was on the original one. The new one now is somewhat smaller and it's this light looking thing. It's a lot, more modern looking. So they were huge machines, and basically amateurs didn't get into this. There was in the 130 years, because the first spectroheliograph was taken in March 1892, and it's 2022, so it's 130 years now. There may have been maybe a dozen amateurs, a little bit more, that have done this on their own until 2001. So the next picture is in 2000.
You'll be able to go. Click on it.
Okay, click on it?
Yeah.
So in 2001, this gentleman here, his name is Daniel Defano. And he took a webcam and he built a little spectroscope and he wrote the software, because you need software to synthesize the image. And once he did that, the whole world opened up. So, idea, here's an example what you could do right now until very recently. And that's an image I did. That's CAK. And this is, just keep in mind that in some sense, this image is no different than 130 years ago, except that you put it on a computer, it's still only one image. Like in deep sky photography or planetary, you stack a lot of images. And when you do that, it takes away a lot of noise and it makes the image a lot better. This isn't bad for a one stack image, but one thing about spectroheliographs, that why they still exist, is that they're very narrow, much more narrow you can get them filtered without paying a fortune. They're also very uniform because it's only one line. And that's what kept it alive, basically. It was almost dead technology once filters came around. But it did survive. And so then, once you get stuff on computers, it opens up a lot of people's minds, because then it's just data. So how do you process the data? So the first thing was, can we try to stack it based on one scan? Let me explain that. This is very recent stuff, and I'm not kidding, it's within the last year. So I drew this picture. The way it does it is that each one of these is a frame, and it represents a scan, one line. And normally the way the software works is that it skips to try to make the image smoother. You can see it's pretty smooth. So you see the orange, it says skip, 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 skip. And then the black one there is, So the idea, and this is just a patch method, was fool the software into creating 3 images. Start at frame 1, then skip, and then go to frame 4. And then after that, go back and make another image, but start at frame 3, and then skip, skip, skip. And then do it again. This is not ideal. But believe it or not, it did help a little bit. All right. So this is an image I did with no stack, just to see how that worked. And that's just an H alpha image. And you can see that there's a kind of like feathering. You see that little feathering at the edges there? And the image is a little bit flat looking because it's, you know, it's only one image. Then, okay, so then the same image, except taking those through, but it's really the same image, but you're feathering it a little bit. So it's a little bit off. And if you look at this carefully, like over here, you can see that it cleaned it up a little bit. Not too effective. You can see that this got a little brighter. It's better than nothing, but it's not the best. So then what happened? Happened is, oh yeah, let's go to the links. Let's go to the links. Oh boy, I don't know if I can get these links to work. They're not active, right? I wanted to go to this. Oh, they is, okay.
Control.
Okay. Now, let me just give you an idea. This whole thing with spectroscopy and solar spectroscopy, somehow it's centered around the Paris area in this whole Madonna. And sometimes it goes into England, if you read the history, and sometimes it goes to California where Hale was. But somehow it always winds up back there. And they've come up with some really bright ideas. So do that. Control click. All right. So this is in French. You can hit the, you know, the English button. Now, just to show you, remember that image I showed you of the Madonna original? Look what they've done. It's basically now the size of a small box, about 8 big. You know, something like a Herschel wedge. And this thing is incredibly powerful. I'll leave it in French, it doesn't matter. This word here, this treatment, is basically how you do processing of the image. That's your presentation, the theory, the construction, the observation, the treatment, and
Is that the one that's 3D printed?
yes, correct. You can download from this site everything you need. You know, the way I did it, the hard way, which is do it all myself. All past history now. This isn't even smaller than mine. Mine weighs about 5 pounds. This is even less. And you can see they wrote the software. Not only, there it is, this guy holding it by his hand. So it's incredible now. They went from this monster thing to something that basically can hold you in your hand. And here's an image they did with that. And you can see it's a very high quality image. And there he is, you know, using one of these what, about $300-400 printers, and put the whole thing out. Okay. Now, what they did was the software is really what counts. It's this guy right here, this thing called an IDI. And what it does is it does all the processing for you. And it's actually cleaner than the other ones that I've used. But now here's the interesting part. This is pretty good as it is. Someone in England, this is an open software. So it uses Python. You have to load Python in your computer. Some guys in England, they took this and they modified it a little bit. It reminds me very similar to what happened to Jules Jensen, where Huggins came in and just modified the slit, and they had the whole, took a good idea and made it better. So these guys, what they did is they modified the software where it takes each image and makes them more uniform so you can stack them. Keep that in mind, start over here. And now I'm going to present to you the images. Now, these are not my images because I just got this stuff loaded on my system. And, you know, I started playing around with it. And they also wrote a whole procedure on how to do this. So I got, you know, it's relearning stuff all over again. But just to give you an idea of just how good. Once this guy, remember, this is, they call themselves the Smiths of London. That's their handle, okay? Just to give you an idea of how good their images are now. This is one of their images. It's unbelievable. This is as good now as what I've seen, you know, Larry do with his, and look at this when you blow it up. Look at that. This is a Shig image. This is not a filter image. But keep in mind, the narrow bandpass is phenomenally narrow. And plus, look at the uniformity. It's just nice and clean right across. And it's just, it makes you want to cry. It's just like, everything you've done before is kind of, it's like, whoa. So what they've done, this is what's happening is, if you remember film pictures of planets, they suck. And then once you started sucking them, once they stack them all together and then you process them, also you get all the detail that came out. So this is, what they've done is basically make the spectroheliograph not as competitive as a filter image.
So how long does it take to get all the signal from the telescope?
Well, man, that's interesting, because in this procedure, what they do, and I've been trying this myself now, is that they use the hand controller and they scan forward, scan back, scan forward. They'll do it 10, 11 times, and they'll do it sometimes at 13 times sidereal rate. Yeah, it's a little bit, you have to, there's a little work. I have a little bit of a learning curve with this, you know, I mean, I got the software to work. When you load Python, make sure you hit the little button on the bottom that says put it on the Windows pathway, else it won't work at all. There was a little learning curve there, okay, so, but.
How do they catch the plumes?
What? The proms?
No, on the edge.
Yeah, the prominences, yeah, no, that's normal, you get that even.
Oh, I mean, if they're going through and covering it line by line 13 times and.
No, one scan is many thousands, it's like, it's splitting it really fine, they have a nine micron slit, so it's pretty narrow. And the scans themselves might take, with speed, it'll take, I don't know, 15 seconds or so.
Okay.
So it's 15 seconds times 10, 11. And these stacks are more similar, by the way, to deep sky photography, not with planetary, you do thousands of stacks. This is, they claim that you shouldn't do more than 20. So it's almost like you're doing like a shot of like M51 or something like that. Okay, so it's pretty incredible what they've done with this. And my favorite one though is, this is my favorite one, because this to me is one of the best. This is hydrogen beta. This is one of the best hydrogen betas I've ever seen. I mean, it's just, you blow it up and the detail there is just incredible. So this is like the next level now with this. You went from film to scan, one scan. Daniel Different puts it on the computer. Once you get the data on the computer, you can do a lot of manipulations and you can get pretty good images. But this is like the next, they've done, which with spectroheliograph images, what planetary stacking did, you know, like Damien Peach and Christopher Go, you ever see, I mean, at one time you had to be in space to get images like that. And that's what they've done. And so that's it in a nutshell, basically. And that's just one more shot. This is just what the software looks like when you open it up, and you can figure it out yourself. And you can get rid of it again.
Thanks, Joe.
Our next speaker is Joe Rayo. Is Joe on one? I have to say.
He was.
Yeah, I still see. There he is.
There he is.
There he is.
No.
Can anybody hear me or?
Yeah.
Oh, there we are. Okay. So I'm just going to go through the machinations here of sharing my screen so all of you can see this is a PowerPoint presentation. And it is discussing the event that is coming up in December. I just get the slideshow here and get up to the beginning. Okay, can everybody see that? Or all right. Well, as you know, I'm assuming that most of you are aware. In December, we're going to have Mars arrive at opposition to the Sun. This is an event that occurs about 26 months on average, 2 years and 2 months. The Earth in its orbit around the Sun will overtake Mars in our respective orbits. And when we do that and pass Mars, Mars, again at opposition, opposite to the Sun in the sky, rising when the Sun sets, highest at midnight, and setting when the Sun rises. And we will be arriving at that situation in early December. Now, not all oppositions, as I'm sure a lot of you know, are alike because of the fact that the Earth and the planet Mars travel in elliptical orbits. There are times when we pass Mars that we're exceptionally close to Mars. And in fact, many of you may remember back in 2003, we were within about 34 million miles of Mars, which was the closest approach of Mars to the Earth in about 60,000 years. More recently, we had a very favorable Mars apparition in the summer of 2018, late July, when we were within about 36 million miles of Mars. And then a couple of years later, 2 years and 2 months later, in October of 2020, we were within about 39 million miles from Mars. You could see how the orbits differ in the fact that, well, when we have an opposition in the summertime, our orbit is close to Mars or closest to Mars. Many of you are aware that in July, we are at that point in space where we're farthest from the Sun. We're at aphelion. And the same token, at that same time of the year, Mars is close to its perihelion point, closest to the Sun. So the difference or distance between the two planets are about as close as they can get. And then as we continue along the way here, and as we get on toward fall and winter, notice how the orbits get wider or more stretched apart. The upcoming opposition of Mars in December will put Mars approximately 51 or 52 million miles away from the Earth. And by 2027, we are going to be about as far away from Mars at opposition as we can get. This would be in February. We would be at our near point to the Sun. Mars would be at its far point. So Mars in 2027 at the opposition then will be about 66 million miles from the Earth. Again, we'll be about as far from Mars at opposition as we can get. Now, when the moon is 100% illuminated, we call that a full moon. However, another way to describe this particular phase is we could also say moon at opposition. Because as you can see, if the rays of the sun coming from this direction, if the sun were up here outside of the view up here, the moon, when it's at new phase, is more or less aligned with the sun, and so we can't see it. It's at new moon phase, but then as it moves along in its orbit, we come about 7 or 8 days later to first quarter or half moon phase, and then about 2 weeks after new moon, we come to full moon. And as you can see, from our vantage point, here's the moon, the sun is out here, and so the moon is opposite to the sun in the sky. People, I more than once in my life, I've had people contact me and say, I want to take a picture of that rising full moon, but I don't know where on the horizon I can point my camera. And I say it's very simple. Wait until just before sunset and take a look at your shadow. And your shadow will be pointing. The shadow will be diametrically opposite to where the sun is in the sky, and the shadow will be pointing to that part of the eastern horizon where the moon will be rising, and that indeed is where the moon rises, because again, it's opposite to the sun. So we have a full moon when it's opposite to the sun. But interestingly, this year, on the night of December 7th, late on the night of December 7th, we're going to have a most interesting situation, a syzygy, if you will. 4 objects, the sun, the earth, the moon, and the planet Mars all will be aligned and in such a way or such a manner so that we're going to have a situation where both the moon and Mars will be opposite to the sun at the same time. In fact, take a look at this. This is the night of December 7th and 8th. Full moon will be on December 7th. That's a Wednesday night at 11:08 p.m. And then Mars arrives at opposition, diametrically opposite to the sun, at 12:35 a.m. So the difference between full moon and Mars arriving at opposition is only going to be 87 minutes. And I can tell you that using all kinds of different planetarium software like Starry Night Pro and Dance of the Planets and Stellarium, I did some checking. I looked back like a few hundred years in the past. I looked a few hundred years in the future. This, by far and away, is the closest that a full moon comes to an opposition of Mars. Only 87 minutes difference. And as a result, an artifact of that occurrence will be that on the night of December 7th, late on the night of December 7th, we are going to have an occultation of the planet Mars. Now you can see here the yellow line relative to the contiguous United States. And this is the line that marks the edge, the southern limit, if you will, of the occultation. So basically, everybody who is to the left or above this line will see Mars occulted by the moon. If, however, you are located south and east of this line or below this line, it will end up being a near miss. Mars will not be occulted. The moon will come very close to Mars, but there will not be an occultation. Now, just to show you how close this is going to be for us here in the lower Hudson Valley, we have here what looks to be a path. Now, if we were talking about an occultation of a star, remember, a star is nothing more than a pinpoint of light. And so when we talk about the moon occulting a star, and if we're talking about a situation where the moon is going to graze the star, well, the grazing line is only going to be basically a few hundred yards wide. This is why when we have occultations of bright stars, like let's say Spica or Aldebaran or Regulus, and you hear about expeditions to watch an occultation or grazing occultation, a lot of these folks will be located right along a path, which again is probably no more than a few hundred yards wide. And what you would see would be the moon grazing the star. The star may actually end up going in and out and in and out behind mountains and valleys on the edge of the moon's surface. But this is not a star. This is the planet Mars, and Mars is not a pinpoint of light. And since it's going to be at opposition, it's going to have a rather sizable disk. In fact, the disk of Mars on this night will be 17.2 arc seconds across. I mean, as opposed to Jupiter, which this month is showing us a disk of 50 arc seconds. 17.2 may sound small, but 17.2 is pretty big when you consider it's the planet Mars. But since it is a disk, we cannot assume that it's going to be just a line a few hundred yards wide. It will be a path, and the path will be roughly 20 miles wide. What does this mean? This means that if you're located, let's say, right inside of the edge of this path, right on the southern limit of this path, you will see Mars touch the moon's disk. Maybe a small segment of Mars will go behind the moon, but most of Mars will still be out and about and visible. If, however, you go into the path and you go all the way up to the upper limit of the path, I don't know where my cursor went. Here it is, right there. You can see where Pennsylvania is. If you're up here near the northern limit of this path, you will see most of Mars go behind the moon, and only a small segment of it will still remain outside of the disk of the moon. So if you're inside of this path, anywhere from the southern limit to the northern limit, you'll see a partial occultation. You will see Mars partially covered by the disk of the moon. So that would be interesting. Now notice where we are. We in the New York area are going to be outside of that zone of occultation, so we'll see Mars, the moon miss Mars, but it doesn't take very long. Probably north of Poughkeepsie places you inside of this path, inside of this zone. So if you want to see a partial occultation or a partial eclipse of Mars, that will be the place to go. Probably up past Poughkeepsie, you'll probably be in it. I beg all of your apologies. I have not had a chance to do any specific look as to where or what towns or communities are within the partial occultation zone. I think Kingston is, but certainly as we get closer, I'll have a better handle on this. I suppose for me, I live in Putnam Valley, so I probably am going to get on the Taconic State Parkway, go north, and when I figure out where exactly the partial occultation zone it is, I'll probably pull over or turn off on one of the exits on the Taconic and just break out the telescope and take a look. Here's how it is if you're in New England. I gave this talk at Stellafane this past summer in August, and figuring since I was going to be in the heart of New England, I'd tell all the New Englanders where this zone was going to be. As you can see, just north of Springfield, Massachusetts, and look right on the outskirts of Boston, Beantown, Lowell, Lawrence, Haverhill, Salem, Nashua, all of these places, Derry, will be in the partial occultation zone for this particular event. Now, what about folks who are going to be in that zone of partial occultation? This is basically what you're going to see. You'll see Mars graze the moon. This was an occultation that occurred back in 2003 from Florida. The only difference is that was a waxing gibbous, a waning gibbous moon. This is going to be a full moon, so the moon, unfortunately, is not going to pass behind the dark portion of the moon's disk. The moon is going to be bright all the way straight through. But again, if you are in the partial occultation zone, you will be able to see Mars partially hidden by the moon. That's a rather unusual sight. I've never seen it before, and hopefully I'll have that opportunity coming up in December. Now, how about all of us who are outside of the zone? Just how close will it be? Well, as Don Adams would say, missed it by that much, Chief. And it is going to be a very close call. For example, in Washington, D.C., the closest approach between the southern limit of the moon's disk and Mars, the center of Mars, will be equivalent to 1.7 arc minutes. In Baltimore, or as they say they're down there, Baltimore, 10:47 p.m., 1.5 arc minute difference. Philadelphia, 10:51 p.m., 1.4 arc minute. New York, 1.1. And notice, if you will, as you go up the eastern seaboard, as the shadow of the moon, which will be a big cylinder, so to speak, as the shadow comes up along the eastern seaboard, notice how the times get a little bit later on in the evening. New York, 10:56, 1.1 arc minute difference between the edge of the southern edge of the moon and Mars. Hartford, 10:59, only 0.6 arc minute difference. Providence, 0.9 at 11 p.m. and Boston, 11:01 p.m., 0.6 arc minute difference. And if you say so, well, how much is that? Remember, the Mars will be 17.2 arc seconds across. So more or less, we're talking about, if we're talking about 1 arc minute, we're talking about roughly 3 Mars diameters separating the southern edge of the moon, or the edge of the moon, and the center of Mars. That's how close. So here from New York City, for example, a person looking up at just before 11 o'clock on that night, if it's clear, will see a full moon, and Mars will be negative 1.9 magnitude, very bright. So it will appear that the moon, for a few moments, will have a very bright amber or yellow-orange jewel hanging off the bottom of the disk of the moon that night. And of course, people who go further north of New York will see it even closer. And if you go even further north than that, you'll be able to see a true occultation. This is actually, some people may call this a very close conjunction, but actually, this is what we would call an appulse. The definition of an appulse in astronomy, the apparent very near approach of one celestial body to another, coming into conjunction. That great conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn a couple of years ago where the two planets were separated by only 6 arc minutes. Well, that could have been called an appulse as opposed to a close or great conjunction. And this, indeed, for us, for those who don't see the occultation, this is going to be an appulse of the moon with the planet Mars. Now, I'm sure that all of you will alert your family and friends about this, and I'm sure that it'll be cloudy that night. But if it's not, if it's not, and you do decide to watch either the pulse or travel north to see the occultation, a lot of people are going to ask the question, well, how often does this happen? How often does Mars cover the moon? Well, to answer that question, some of you who are old timers in astronomy may remember that in July of 1974, just before sunrise, we had an occultation of the planet Venus. And I remember that well. Now, I was a member, and I'm still a member, of the Amateur Observer Society, the AOS. And at that time, the AOS had an agreement with the Empire State Building. The Empire State Building said, sure, if you want to watch an unusual astronomical event, bring your telescopes up, and, we'll allow you to go up there at any hour of the night. The 86th floor observation deck was open to us. And so we went up there, and I can tell you it was a spectacular sight to watch as a lovely crescent moon crossed in front of the planet Venus. That was only a few weeks after I graduated high school, so that was a long time ago. The next day after the occultation, there was an article in the New York Times about this event. Moon is a co-star with planet Venus in a celestial show. I remember this article well. I looked at it, but I got rather troubled by the article. I don't know who wrote it. I don't know where they got the information that they quoted in here from, but what I do know is that it disturbed me. First of all, it says here in the second paragraph, while newspaper and radio stations received inquiries about the light, amateur and professional astronomers in New York were delighting in a rare occultation of the bright planet Venus by the moon, the first one visible in this area in modern times. And I said, well, wait a minute, modern times? What do they mean by that? I don't know how many of you have a copy of the wonderful autobiography written by Leslie Peltier, Starlight Nights. But in 1923, Peltier wrote about an occultation of Venus before sunrise that he saw from Ohio, and it was also visible from here in the New York area. So there was at least one other occultation in the 20th century, back in the 1920s. And then in the 1930s, if you have another book, some of you may have New Handbook of the Heavens. That was a very, wonderful book on amateur astronomy. And there was a picture taken of an occultation of Venus from an apartment building in the late 1930s. So there were 2 occultations, one in 1923, another in like 1937. Then we had this one in 1974. And then there was another one. How many of you remember the day after Christmas in 1978? There was another occultation of Venus. So the fact that, they're assuming that Venus occultations are very unusual. In fact, here's the thing that really got me upset. Although the frequency of the phenomenon has not been calculated, it is believed to be as rare an event to be visible from a given spot on the Earth as is a total eclipse of the sun. On the average, solar eclipses are visible from any one point every 360 years. So what the New York Times is saying was that this occultation in 1974 was the first one to be visible from the New York area in about 300 years. And I knew, reading that was wrong. And it kind of stuck in my craw for a very long period of time. Then in 2010, many years later, I'm a member of SEML, the Solar Eclipse Mailing List. This is a group of internet people who are into solar eclipses and also eclipses of all kind. And I just happened to mention in 2010 about this, and I said, the New York Times, I remember back in 1974, said occultations of Venus are as rare as total eclipses from any one given spot on the Earth. The next day, after I had posted that on SEML, I got an email from this gentleman. And this is probably one of the great astronomical calculators of our time. His name is Jean Meus. He is a very famous celestial calculator from, he lives in Belgium. He actually is a retired meteorologist, but he also is very much interested in astronomy and doing astronomical calculations. He is now, I believe, 94 years old. His mind is still as sharp as a tack. But back in 2010, when I made this comment about Venus and frequency of occultations, he wrote to me and he said, "Is this true? Are you absolutely certain?" And I sent him the copy of the newspaper article. And he wrote back, he said, "This is horrible. This is terrible. We must do something about this. Perhaps you can write a letter to the newspaper." And I said, "Well, Mr. Mayus, that's all well and good, but this was something that happened like 40 years ago. Maybe if I wrote the letter the day after or a few days after, it might have made sense, but I don't think it's going to be published. I don't think it's going to make much sense to the New York Times to publish something that happened all those years ago." But he was persistent. He said, "We must do something about this." And then a little while later, he came back and said, "Would you be interested in writing or co-writing a paper with me about this? We'll talk about nocturnal or nighttime occultations, frequency of the planet Venus in our time." And I was blown away. If any of you know of Jean Mayus, if any of you have any of his books, Astronomical Tables of the Sun, Moon, and Planets, or his five-volume mathematical astronomy morsels, where he writes about any and everything, like why is it that more solar eclipses occur on a Tuesday as opposed to a Saturday, and all kinds of crazy thing. And here this master scientist is asking if I'd be interested to write a paper or co-write a paper with him. You could have blown me away with a feather. And I said, of course, I'd be happy. I'd love to do it. I'd be honored. And so we went back and forth for a year, comparing notes and everything else. And then in the February 2011 edition of the Journal of the British Astronomical Association, there indeed was an article, Nocturnal Occultations of the Planet Venus. And we had worked up a methodology where we calculated occultations, nighttime occultations, for about 12 or 14 different places around the world. And then we came up with the averages for all of these places. And it turns out that we found that occultations of Venus at night are not as rare as the New York Times alluded to. In fact, Venus versus Mars, nocturnal or night occultation, because you could have Mars occultations and Venus occultations in the daytime, but we only stuck to when Venus is occulted by the moon at night, or when the sun is below the horizon. And we found that the average frequency for occultations of Venus turned out to be about once every 31 years. And in fact, if you want to put it down in your calendar, we have our next nighttime Venus occultation from the New York area in the year 2031, September of 2031. And that's not too far off in the distant future. It's only about 9 years away. So that's something to look forward to. But then what about Mars? How often do we have occultations of Mars, as we will in December? What I did was I just simply repeated the methodology for Mars as opposed to Venus. And I found that for Mars, the average frequency of occultations, nighttime occultations, is about once every 14 years. And you say to yourself, well, wow, why is it that Mars is more frequent than Venus? Well, if you think about it, Venus, to be occulted by the moon, you must have Venus always within 47 degrees of the sun. Venus can't get to any place further out from the sun than 47 degrees, which means that only a moon 3 or 4 days before or after new phase will be able to occult Venus. Mars, on the other hand, is a superior planet, and Mars, unlike Venus, can appear in any part of the sky at any time of the year, and as a result, any kind of moon can occult Mars. You could have a thin crescent occult Mars, or you can have, as we'll have in December, a full moon occult Mars. In fact, depending upon what type of occultation of Mars, when Mars is, let's say, near to the sun, like Venus, it's occulted by a crescent moon. Mars is usually very dim, maybe along about +2 magnitude. Meanwhile, when Mars is at opposition, as we will have in December, it's about as bright as it can get. A -2 in this particular case coming up in December. So it'll be very, very bright. And again, we get an occultation on average every 14 years with Mars. You say to yourself, well, I can't remember the last time in New York we had an occultation of Mars. And you want to know what? It's been a while. In December of 1985, there was an occultation just south of New York City. In fact, I traveled with some friends to a place near Tom's River, where we were able to watch a grazing occultation of Mars back in, again, 1985. Well, all these events since then of Mars have either been during the daytime or they've missed New York. And this one, in fact, if you think about it, misses New York too, but it's in our area, it's in our vicinity. So we get a chance to at least see a very close appulse or a very close occultation of Mars. And the next time after this December, the next time we have another chance to see Mars occulted, remember 14 years is an average. The next time comes on Monday, January 13th, 2025, once again, right around the same time as this one, 11 o'clock in the evening. And interestingly, this one again, very close to the time of a full moon and Mars at opposition. In fact, Mars will be at opposition on January 15th, and the moon is going to be very close to full on January 13th. So we're going to have almost a repeat, except this time, this occultation in 2025 will be visible across the whole of North America. So it will not be one of these cases where the occultation zone will kind of split or cut across one part of the United States and avoid the other. So that's what's coming up in December. And maybe a bunch of us will meet somewhere up north and watch the partial occultation, or maybe you just want to settle into your house and watch the moon grazingly come close to Mars on that night. A date that will live in infamy, the 7th of December, 2022. And that's it. I thank you for listening.
I have a presentation. I know it's been a late night. I have 5 minutes. And then you can just-
The last one?
Yeah, yeah. Mine is very
Go for it.
fast.
I didn't get that question because it was a little distorted. If so,
No, I don't think we have any questions.
oh, okay.
I just had one question, Joe. I was just wondering, why is the path of that occultation in 2025 so much wider than the one that's going to happen?
Well, the path I did not put the path up for the one in 2025. Probably the southern limit is going to be, because it's going to encompass the whole of North America. So
Yeah.
the southern limit is going to be much further south, probably going across Central America or maybe northern South America. It's a difference in the trajectory of the moon on the sky on that particular night, and then that particular night is the case with solar eclipses. In that case, the zone of visibility is going to be a bit different than what we'll have coming up in December. But that one again in 2025 will be visible in its entirety. The occultation will occur across all of the United States and through most of all of North America. So I guess if you want to see a grazing occultation, you'll either have to go way, way south into Latin America, or if you want to go to the northern limit of the occultation, maybe it's across northern Canada or up near Alaska. And quite frankly, I don't see any reason to go to northern Alaska or northern Canada in January.
Thanks, Joe.
It tends to get a little cold.
Thanks.
Thank you. So I just have quick 5 minutes. Well, like Bob, I'm a space geek, and I'm actually on the board of the Cradle of Aviation Museum, which is out on Long Island, out by Roosevelt Field. And I just wanted to give a quickie about that. It's basically celebrates the history of aviation on Long Island, going back to the Hempstead Plains Aerodrome. It's where Lindbergh took off on his historic flight to Paris. It's founded by many ex-Grumman employees, and I'm sort of linked in because my grandfather worked at Grumman at the time of the Lem module, so I sort of have it in my blood. I grew up in Bethpage at the end of the runway, so I love airplane noise. Like if plane flies over your house and shaking, I think that should increase the real estate value. So Right, just a couple, this is actually my favorite plane that they have there is the Grumman G-21 Goose amphibious airplane. They actually have a model, it's a reproduction of the Spirit of St. Louis, but it's been flown. It's a real aircraft. And they have, some World War II, or World War I, World War II. But it's really based on, a lot of the history is based on Apollo missions. So they have a command module, they have simulators, but the crowning jewel there is we have an actual LEM module that is a real LEM module, was supposed to fly, but because the Apollo program was canceled, it's now a museum piece.
It was Apollo 19.
Yeah, well, they said 18 or 19 it was supposed to go. So now, traditionally the museum is always being looking backwards. Now we're trying to look more forward now that space is, really things are really happening in space. So they have a lot of exhibits about the future of space. It's very hands-on, which is good for kids of all ages, including me. You can go and touch things and pretend you're flying airplanes and things like that. We have great speakers. We have a CradleCon, which is like Comic-Con. We've met we've met so many of the astronauts over the years at various different events. This is some of the Apollo 13 crew and flight directors. I dragged Larry and Elise out there. We all met Buzz Aldrin a number of years ago. Just two upcoming events. Fred Hayes, who's the most wonderful, kind person, is going to be talking about his book that's been out for a little while. So he's Apollo 13 astronaut, and Apollo 13 was one of his least disasters. He's actually been through quite a few disasters, including a plane crash where he had severe burns all over his body. And so he just talks about how do you deal with crises, and he's a very charming man. This one's Thursday, September 29th at 7 o'clock, $20 tickets. And then we have our gala, which is more involved, of course. We're having we're going to have a panel discussion of several of the people involved in the Apollo program. And we're also honoring David Nealman. This is a little more expensive, $300, because it's a full formal dinner and everything. And where is it? So I live in Larchmont. It's 32 miles from my house, which is 40 minutes without traffic. Even on the weekend, it's really not bad. If you go during the week, during the rush hour, I give myself 2 hours. It can be quite excruciating. That was the one thing good about COVID. There was no traffic. It's now the COVID thing is over. We're back to the LIE. It's excruciating. And it's right off the Meadowbrook, close to the Coliseum. So I just wanted to kind of do a quick thing about that. Thank you for everybody. Thank you for all the participants. Thank you for the cookies, and we'll see you next month.